Hi everyone, it's John, and I'm back this week with another book review for you. Again, exactly 7 days later, like I said. I want to review for you one of the best books that I think I've read, certainly novels, that I've read in probably 2 or 3, 4 years. I'm going to gush a bit um, about how much I loved it, so excuse me for that ahead of time. I think there are, I would imagine, I haven't looked, but I would imagine there are probably several reviews of this on BookTube already. But I just wanted to share my own thoughts, impressions about how really beautiful this book is. As you can already tell from the title, the book is Kazuo Ishiguro's The Remains of the Day. I think most people are probably pretty familiar with Thoreau's little bon mot about most people leading lives of quiet desperation. But the brilliance of the entire paragraph with its context is in which it's couched is lost. So um, let me remind you of where that expression comes from. In this book, by the way, The Remains of the Day might be the book which most encapsulates for me what Thoreau is talking about, his fullest sentiment when he said this, quote, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. What is called resignation is confirmed desperation. From the desperate city, you go into the desperate country and have to console yourself with the bravery of minks and muskrats. A stereotyped but unconscious despair is concealed even under what are called the games and amusements of mankind. There is no play in them, for this comes after work. But it is a characteristic of wisdom not to do desperate things." Unquote. Keep that quote in mind. In The Remains of the Day, we have a protagonist. His name is Stevens. He's an English butler whose duties and obligations to others sort of hang around his neck like the chains that used to weigh down Bob Marley. Bob Marley, excuse me. Jacob Marley. That was funny. I don't think it was change that was weighing down Bob Marley. Jacob Marley in life. Um, the novel opens in 1956 with his current employer, who is sort of a gauche, outspoken, very charismatic American, and he also happens to be the new proprietor of the building where Stevens works. It's called Darlington Hall. It's really what Americans would call a castle or a palace. It's a generations old, in the family residence. Um, his name is Mr. Faraday, this outgoing American, and he opens the novel by suggesting that Stevens take a vacation, get out of the house for a few days. And it's really a nicely timed request on Mr. Faraday's part because Stevens has just received a letter from Miss Kenton, who used to work at Darlington Palace, and he plans to want to spend this time and go and visit her. So his trip gives him a lot of time to reminisce on the nature of his life, his profession, his place in the grand scheme of things. So the novel is sort of episodic in the way that it rolls out. Each chapter takes up one little story or episode or narrative that Stevens retells or recollects for the reader, always in a very highly mannered, fastidious way, I guess befitting an English butler of the interwar years. This kind of closed-in, insular self, which Butler really personifies is, I think, what drives the novel forward and what pushes it. Most authors would tell you what motivates their characters, but Ishiguro never really tells and very rarely even shows. In the 20th century, where almost any secret about personal identity is considered harmful or toxic, everything has to be out there, everything has to be public, the reader is sort of left awestruck at the fact that Stevens can continuously negate his own ego in the service of others. He always, like I said, negates himself. He takes his subservience as a butler very, very, very seriously. And we're awestruck not because it's something that we wish to emulate, because of course we can't imagine putting, imagine an American in the year 2021 early in their lives and dedicating their entire lives to the service of a family. It's just not something that happens anymore. But Stephen's father was a butler, which we learn also in the novel. But we can't even really conceptualize doing this. But he does it, and Stevens claims that this negation, this putting the family first, putting the needs, priorities, wants, whims of the family first, and negating himself, are the sort of the source of his own dignity and pride. Stevens is not an unreliable narrator so much as he is unwitting, for he really truly can be said to know as little of himself as the reader does. The perceptive reader learns more about Stevens, unfortunately, than Stevens does over the course of his entire life, which might tell you something about the ending, but I'm not going to explicitly tell you. I'm trying to tell you as much as I can while telling you as little about the book as I can. I'm trying to convince you to read it. Only slowly do we start to see the tiny fictions and the purposeful evasions that Stevens reinforces himself with on a daily basis, and the indulgent selflessness that he breathes in every single day. Ultimately, The Remains of the Day is how the brute facts of language are not enough to communicate. We need a background of shared values. Values not in a narrow, moralistic, sententious sense of the way the term family values is usually used, but in the wider sense of values as in those things that we hold important. Stevens struggles to live in an increasingly isolated world that can no longer hear and understand what he has to say, and he can no longer hear and understand the people around him. This results in his disconnection from the world and from himself, ultimately, as we watch everything, every single last thing, fall through his fingers. And that is perhaps the tragedy that rests at the heart of this really, really tremendous book. There's a phrase that I think was popularized by drag queens. I don't know how old it is. It could be like back from the old ball days of the 60s and 70s, or it could be new. But it's called reading someone. It's just when you look at someone and you criticize them wittily or funnily, with the sense of humor, and it's just sharp and exact and precise, like a surgical cut. That's what this book does to Stevens. This is a read of Stevens. and it's sad. Usually reads are funny. Um, I don't mean reads as in novel reads, but I mean, in that sense of the word. Um, they're supposed to be humorous or witty. And this is not without its wit, it's not without its, smiley moments, but it's never laugh out loud. It's not that kind of book. But it is a deep analysis of Stevens. And um, and it's tough to read the end. Um, I'm making it sound like someone dies. I promise no one dies, but it's still tough. Just a stunningly uh, beautiful book, and also beautiful in the way that not a lot of books are beautiful in recently. I found this book is going on. I think it's exactly 35 years old this year. This is beautiful in a very quiet, understated way. It doesn't shout at you. It doesn't beat you over the head. It doesn't moralize, but it has something to say, and it says it very clearly, but also very quietly too. So if you haven't read it, I don't think I've ever heard anyone dislike this book. Whenever I've seen someone or heard someone mention it, they always sing its praises. And I just wanted to add my voice to that chorus because I am in total agreement. This is, like I said, maybe one of the best novels I've read in 3 or 4 or 5 years. By the way, if you're thinking about time commitments, it is a grand total of maybe 225 pages, which I understand most people can probably read in a day. Not me, but most people. Give it a try. I think you would probably really, really enjoy this if you like the other kind of content that I show on my channel. I will see you again next week. Bye.